I've just finished constructing this 3-door sliding wardrobe and just give you an insight into how it works. The doors were professionally made and the rest of the construction was MDF and a bit of general DIY. Seems to work okay. We'll now go into the details of how it was all put together. It wasn't particularly easy because there's not a simple right angle between the walls and the ceiling. I think it's trunking that the contractors installed when converting this old school building into flats. This was potentially going to make the sliding doors a real complication, so I decided to lower the ceiling above the wardrobe area to line up with the trunking. I also took the opportunity to install some downlighters, which I think gave a very good effect. I probably spent almost as much time measuring and planning my strategy as I did actually assembling the cupboard. I didn't have access to a workshop, so I had all the MDF cut to size at B&Q, leaving me with a minimum of carpentry. I also worked around the fact that MDF comes in standard sheets measuring 2.4 by 1.2 meters, which influenced the depth of the wardrobe. I wanted as few brackets as possible in the finished cupboard, so here's how I planned it. I would lay down 2 floor pieces 18mm apart to make space for the centre panel in the groove between. Next, I would glue a panel to the right wall, followed by the centre panel. The shelf would go on next and be screwed down to the right end and centre panels. The left panel would be glued in place and screwed to the base and the shelf, then the top right wall panel could be glued in too. That left the shelf divider to be glued in and finally the top panel. Incidentally, I used a cartridge glue for the assembly, of which there are many on the market. One of my favourites is Grip Fill, but Pink Grip is equally good. It really depends what's available. I've put some links below to both these products. My first job was to cut away the carpet, for which I used a floor panel as a template. With the carpet and underlay cut right through, it was a fairly simple job to remove both. Then I had to cut the carpet gripper strip, a job for which the multi-saw came in very handy. I also used the multi-saw to cut the skirting board. The gripper strip itself is full of sharp tacks, so you need to either wear a strong pair of gloves or handle them with great care. I needed to relay the gripper strip in position to hold the carpet tight up against the cupboard base. This first meant peeling back the carpet and then cutting the underlay back further to make room for the strip. Note that the tacks on the strip are angled and they must point towards the wall to grip the carpet properly. With the floor space cleared, I was ready to start building, beginning with the 2 floor panels which just needed laying down. I could have glued or screwed these into place, but I didn't really think it necessary. Reattaching the carpet to the gripper strip was relatively straightforward. Professional fitters use a special tool to stretch the carpet tight, but I didn't have one to hand, so I just pressed it down as securely as I could onto the gripper strip. I had a complication in the corner of the cupboard in that there was a power socket which was obviously going to end up inside the cupboard and therefore needed moving. I had already checked out that the plasterboard walls had a cavity behind, so I simply had to cut some holes, thread an extension wire behind and install a new socket. Well, that was the theory. It took rather longer than I had anticipated and I ended up cutting more holes in the plasterboard than I had planned. Never mind, they're relatively easier to fill in afterwards. Okay, I've fitted a junction box and run an extension 13 amp cable behind the wall and through to a new wall socket here. Unfortunately, I couldn't put a sunken one because there's only about 10mm clearance between the plasterboard and the wall behind. I'm going to cover this with a sort of MDF panel, I think, because at some point in the future somebody might want to get to it and it'll be much easier rather than plastering it all in. So that'll be a little job once I put the side in. So now I've channeled my wiring behind the wall, I can put the end panel in. The wall's nowhere near square. Unbelievable. So what we're going to have to do is put some shims under there. I bought a pack of these. These are all different thicknesses of shim. The colour denotes the thickness, so I've got the panel in position and I'm happy it's square. So that's really good news. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bond it with a bit of adhesive. With the end panel in place, I was left with a big gap between that and the floor. The best way to deal with that was to use an epoxy 2-part filler, which provides a very strong joint. The filler requires mixing thoroughly and then using pretty quickly, as it sets in just a few minutes. I'm now going to drill holes for the coat hanger rail. We're going to have it 25 centimetres in from the wall, which seems to be a pretty standard fitting. And going to leave, don't want it too close to the board at the top, so want a bit of, we'll have it 90 down. So that's the centre of the hole. Let's take that off. 3. I'm not going to screw the fitting on yet because I'm going to paint the board, so at least it's all ready. I could now fix the centre panel into position, but first I had to cut a slot to allow for the skirting board at the back. To match the end panel, I've made a couple of shims already in there, and I have just double checked. I've made a mark on the wall and I've got a line in the middle of the panel up about there. So I'm going to apply a bead of glue along the edge there and put it in place. The reason for this big gap here is to allow the drawer runners, which have got to go along there. You have to, they're about 90mm wide. I planned to screw the shelf to the centre panel, so I drilled and countersunk the necessary holes. So on the other side of the shelf, I'm going to fit this lighting strip, just to show you what it looks like. Plug it in, switch on, and that should give a nice interior light for the cupboard. So what I have to do is screw these clips in place to run it through, and then I can fit it all to the board. Now I need to find the centre of this wire, so just line up the two ends and it's about there. So I'm going to start here. I want to plug at this end. To finally hold that end bit in place. Oh, just remembered. I have to cut a little piece out for the light strip. Sits where it would be handy to have a helper. I've got one in here. That bit will go on there. Well, I'm ready to fit the left-hand end panel in position. I've drilled the holes and countersunk them for the shelf. Now I just need to apply some adhesive to the back edge. Got to try and lift it up without getting glue all over my fingers and clothes. Pop the end panel in position. Now I'm just going to get this position for the screw holes, and so I can make sure it's absolutely horizontal. There. So now I need to get this up to position. With the first screw just holding the shelf in place, I then drilled small pilot holes for the others. I could then drive the screws end on into the shelf without the worry of splitting the MDF. Perfect. Absolutely brilliant. So now I've got both ends in place, centre. What I need to do next is put the top shelf in so I can get the measurement for the doors. We're getting there. I've had a slight change of plan. My original idea was that this side panel would hold the top shelf, which would go in there. But thinking about it, that's not going to be very neat, and I'm thinking it might be better if I can put the top shelf in there. So I've filled this in, cut some bits, and finished it off with filler so it'll look alright. And I'm now going to glue this panel in place, and then I can screw the top shelf into that. I could drill and bolt that in there, but these adhesives are very good these days, and that should hold well in place. So that's the next stage. Down the side, and a good squiggle on here. This is pretty good stuff, this grip fill. I built a whole shed out of it at one time. Hardly any screws used at all. Right, press hard into place. I need to prop it up with something while the glue dries. Should keep that in place while the glue dries off. Then the top shelf will screw into there. I'm bringing the top shelf out a bit as I want downlights here, so it should look pretty good. In the centre I'm going for a similar arrangement. I've got to bring the level of this up, and I've cut this piece that I can glue in there, and that will hold the shelf. Still not quite sure whether to just trim that off there or trim it off there. I'll have a think about that one. And finally on the left hand end, I've got a similar arrangement. I've glued and screwed a little panel onto there so that I can, again, screw the top shelf underneath there. That should all look pretty smart, and I can tidy all this up and make that look better. Well, I've cut my top panel to size and I'm ready to do a test fit. So that doesn't look good. What's the problem? Okay. Need some adjustment. Too high in the middle. I'm going to have to trim some off here. That's a bit of a pain because I glued this in place, so it's going to be quite tricky. I should have done this before I glued that. Silly me. But that fits right there. That fits right there. We're good there. I just have to trim that down a bit. Before I put the shelf back in place, I've added a strip of wood along here which I can attach the plasterboard to. So the final thing, my hole saw, I've got this kit of saws, it's a little bit big but I can get away with it I think. So we'll do a test. I'm going to drill a pilot hole. That should be fine. So, 2 more to go, and then I can screw the shelf in place. Well, I've removed the wall light over here and put some wiring through and put the 3 downlights in there. I put a switch here. My sister is quite short, so just in case she needs to turn them off or on, and she can dim them or brighten them as she needs. I've been filling gaps around the place, put a bit of trim on there to hide the light underneath, and I'm now going to start a bit of painting. I've still got some holes to fill, but I'm waiting to paint behind before I fill the holes. I've ordered the doors because I was able to do my final measurement. You have to be absolutely precise with that, so I waited till I'd done all the construction, measured it very, very carefully, twice, 3 times to make absolutely sure I got it right. And I placed the order because we're talking £600 worth of doors, so I can't afford to mess that up. The next job was to cut the plasterboard to fit above the top shelf, which involves scoring with a sharp knife, then snapping over a suitable fulcrum, with a final cut to the rear paper. After checking the fit, I applied a liberal dose of glue to all edges before bonding in place. The MDF top shelf is sagging slightly, so I put a prop in place to hold it up while the glue dried. To finish off, I'm going to put a very fine coat of plaster over here. Number 1 to make that all smooth, and it'll cover up the edge of the MDF. So I've made a pretty sloppy mixture. About the consistency of custard, but I think that's perfect for what I need to do. And I can cover up this join here so that doesn't show. I can always just run over again if I've missed any little bit. The cut edge of MDF is not particularly attractive unless you either spend a lot of time sanding it or perhaps filling it. It just gives away the fact it's MDF. So I'm going to glue a little bit of BB on there which A, looks much more attractive. The strange thing is, MDF comes in 18mm, but can you bar beading in 18mm? No, that comes in 15 or 20. So what I've had to do, I bought two 9mm pieces of beading and I've glued them together. But why should I have to go to that problem? No coordination between the MDF people and the beading people. In she goes. I'll just hold that in place while the glue dries with a bit of masking tape. Pull nice and tight. Fitting the sliding doors was a whole different ball game, and I decided to make that the subject of a separate video, which I will upload by the end of January 2024. There's a lot of money to be saved when tackling a project like this. My sister was quoted £8,000 for this bookshelf plus a basic fitted wardrobe, i.e. no lighting or electric. I described building the bookshelf in another video, and you'll find the link below. I reckon my total materials bill was around £1,600 for both items. Mind you, this is central London, which really ramps up the costs. If you've enjoyed the construction so far, I would be grateful if you do the usual stuff like subscribe and like. Thank you.